The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor as my mother-in-law's diamond bracelet caught my cheekbone. Blood trickled down my face, warm and sticky, as my 4-year-old daughter Lily's scream cut through the air like a knife through silk. "You gold-digging tramp!" Sandra hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my wrist. That money belonged to my son, not some nobody nurse who trapped him with a pregnancy. Behind her, my father-in-law Robert grabbed my shoulders, slamming me against the kitchen counter I had scrubbed just hours before. The same counter where I'd made Lily's birthday pancakes that morning. The same kitchen in the home my husband Michael and I had bought with our savings. The same house they were now claiming as their inheritance. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her round cheeks. This wasn't the first time she'd seen them hurt me. It wouldn't be the last. But what Sandra and Robert didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 weeks ago, I had made a single phone call that would end their world. Let me back up. Michael died 8 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late. We had 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. 6 weeks to say goodbye to the love of my life. 6 weeks for our daughter to lose her daddy at age 3. The life insurance policy was substantial, $500,000. We'd been responsible, we'd planned. Michael had made me promise to use it to raise Lily right, to keep our home, to live without financial stress while I grieved. His parents had other ideas. I met Michael when I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, working nights at Seattle General. He was 27, a software developer at a startup that would eventually get acquired for millions. But when we met, he was just a guy in the ER with a badly sprained ankle from a hiking accident, making terrible jokes to avoid thinking about the pain. I fell in love with his laugh. 3 months later, he proposed in that same ER waiting room because he said that's where our story started. His parents hated me from day one. Sandra and Robert Morrison weren't just wealthy. They were Seattle dynasty wealthy. Old money from timber and shipping, now diversified into real estate and tech investments. Robert sat on 3 corporate boards. Sandra chaired half the charity galas in King County. Their son was supposed to marry a Stanford grad, a lawyer, someone from their world. Instead, Michael chose me, Elena Rodriguez, daughter of a housekeeper and a mechanic, raised in a 2-bedroom apartment in South Seattle, first-generation college student who worked 3 jobs to get through nursing school. They boycotted our wedding. Refused to meet Lily for the first year of her life, only started coming around when Michael got promoted, when his startup started making real money, when they realized he was building wealth they might want access to later. When Michael got sick, they were suddenly devoted parents, visiting every day, bringing food, offering help. I thought grief had transformed them. I thought losing their son had cracked open their hearts. I was wrong. 3 days after the funeral, Sandra showed up at my door with a lawyer. They wanted to contest the life insurance beneficiary designation. They claimed Michael had been unduly influenced by me, that he wasn't in his right mind during his illness, that I had manipulated him into leaving everything to me instead of them. The lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, laid out their case with cold precision. They had evidence of my controlling behavior, witnesses who would testify to Michael's diminished capacity. They were prepared to tie up the insurance money in probate for years, but they'd be willing to settle for 60%. I was numb, drowning in grief, exhausted from single parenting while working night shifts, barely functioning. My own parents had passed away years before. Michael's brother lived in Singapore, barely spoke to the family. I had no one. I was alone with a traumatized preschooler and 2 vultures circling my dead husband's legacy. That's when they made their move. "Elena," Sandra said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Robert and I have been talking. You're struggling. We can see that. This house is too much for you to manage alone. The mortgage, the maintenance, raising Lily. What if we moved in for a while? Just temporarily. To help." Every instinct screamed no. But I was so tired, and Lily needed stability. And maybe, I thought, maybe they really did want to help. Maybe grief had changed them. Just for a few weeks, I heard myself say. Until I get back on my feet. They moved in the next day. That's when the real nightmare began. At first, it was subtle. Sandra rearranging my kitchen cabinets, Robert commenting on how I was raising Lily. Small criticisms wrapped in concern. Don't you think she's watching too much television? Michael would have wanted her reading more. This brand of organic milk is overpriced. You need to be more careful with money. Shouldn't she be in a better preschool? Public school is fine for some children, but Lily is a Morrison. Then it escalated. Sandra started taking over, hiring a nanny without asking me, changing Lily's schedule, buying her expensive clothes and toys, then stage whispering to Robert, loud enough for me to hear, "Well, someone has to provide for this child properly." She threw away Lily's favorite worn teddy bear, the one Michael had given her, replacing it with a pristine designer stuffed animal. Lily cried for 3 days. I came home from a 12-hour shift to find they'd moved into the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room I'd shared with Michael. "We need the space," Sandra announced. "Our things require a larger closet. You can take the guest room. Or there's the basement. It's quite comfortable." I took the basement. I was the maid in my own home, cooking their meals, cleaning their rooms, doing their laundry. If I protested, Sandra would sigh dramatically. "After all we're doing for you, Elena, providing childcare, covering groceries, helping with bills. The least you can do is contribute to the household." They weren't covering anything. I was paying for everything. But somehow, in her twisted logic, their mere presence was a gift I should be grateful for. Robert started going through my mail, opening my bank statements, questioning every purchase. $5 at Starbucks? That's fiscal irresponsibility. Michael worked hard for this family's financial security, and you're throwing it away on lattes. Then came the night Sandra slapped me for the first time. I'd made dinner, pot roast, one of Michael's favorites. Sandra took one bite and spat it out. "This is inedible. How did you ever feed my son?" I apologized, offered to make something else. She stood up, walked around the table, and slapped me across the face so hard my ears rang. "Don't you dare offer me your substandard cooking again. From now on, I'll handle meals. You're clearly incompetent." Lily saw it all. She was sitting right there, frozen with a forkful of potatoes halfway to her mouth, watching her grandmother hit her mother. That night, I made the call. I'd been doing my research for weeks, quietly, late at night in my basement room. I knew about grandparents' rights in Washington state. I knew about the legal precedents for custody challenges. I knew that Sandra and Robert were building a case that I was an unfit mother, that they should have guardianship of Lily, that she deserved to be raised by her proper family, not some working-class nurse who could barely keep a roof over her head. I also knew something they didn't. Robert Morrison was a fraud. 6 weeks before Michael died, he'd confided something to me. He was worried about his father. Money had been disappearing from the family trust, the one that was supposed to fund Sandra and Robert's retirement, the one that would eventually pass to Michael and his brother. Michael had been going through the financial statements during a lucid period between chemo treatments, trying to get everything in order, and he'd found discrepancies. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts. "I think my dad's been embezzling from his own family," Michael had whispered, his voice weak from the morphine. "I found documentation in his study last Christmas. I think he's been doing it for years." Michael had copied the files onto a USB drive. He'd planned to confront his father after his treatment. There wasn't time. I found that USB drive in Michael's desk drawer the week after the funeral. I'd been looking for our wedding photos to show Lily. Instead, I found evidence of systematic financial fraud spanning nearly a decade. Robert had been stealing from the family trust, from the charitable foundation he chaired, even from his own mother's estate after she passed. He'd been gambling. Bad investments in cryptocurrency, then desperate attempts to cover the losses. He was drowning in debt, millions in debt, hiding it all behind a facade of old money respectability. That's why they wanted the insurance money. That's why they needed to take everything from me. They were broke. The house they lived in was mortgaged to the hilt. The lifestyle was a lie. They needed to bleed me dry to keep up appearances. So I called a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I called James Chen, the best litigation attorney in Seattle, someone who'd grown up poor like me, who'd built his career on taking down corrupt, wealthy families. I laid out everything: the harassment, the abuse, the custody threat, and the financial evidence. He took my case pro bono. Not because he pitied me, but because he hated people like the Morrisons, people who weaponized wealth to destroy regular people. Give them enough rope, James had said. Document everything. Let them think they're winning. The more brazen they get, the stronger our case becomes. So I stayed. I endured. I let them take over my home. I let them treat me like a servant. I let Sandra hit me and Robert humiliate me. I installed hidden cameras throughout the house. I recorded every conversation. I photographed every bruise. I kept detailed logs. And I protected Lily. That was the line. My lawyer and I agreed. Lily would not be collateral damage. On the worst nights, when Sandra's rages got too violent, when Robert's psychological torture got too intense, Lily stayed with my best friend Rachel, a pediatric nurse I'd worked with for years. I told the Morrisons she was having sleepovers. They didn't care. They barely noticed Lily anyway, except as a prop in their custody case. Rachel was also documenting. Every time Lily came to her house, she photographed any signs of stress. She kept notes on what Lily said, how she described what she'd seen. Rachel was a mandated reporter, and she was building a parallel case with Child Protective Services, ready to deploy if things got too dangerous. I had a team now. I wasn't alone anymore. 6 weeks after that first slap, James was ready. We had everything. Hours of recordings of verbal abuse, video footage of physical assault, financial documents proving Robert's fraud, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed Sandra's public cruelty, Rachel's reports on Lily's trauma symptoms, bank records showing I'd been paying all household expenses while they contributed nothing, evidence of their planned custody challenge based on fabricated claims of my unfitness. Then Michael's brother called from Singapore. Derek Morrison had always been the black sheep, the brother who'd refused to join the family business, who'd moved across the world to get away from his parents' toxicity. When I called him, sobbing one night after Sandra had locked me out of the house in the rain, he'd listened quietly, and then said something that changed everything. I have files too. From when they tried to contest our grandmother's will, evidence they'd rather stayed buried. Send me what you have. I'll send you what I have. Let's bury them together. Derek flew home for the final act. It was Lily's 4th birthday, February 15th. I'd planned a small party, just a few kids from her preschool, cake and balloons in the backyard. Sandra had other ideas. She'd invited half of Seattle's society set, turned it into a Morrison family showcase, complete with a caterer and a photographer and a guest list that didn't include any of Lily's actual friends. I let her. It was perfect. The party was in full swing, dozens of witnesses, when James Chen arrived with Derek Morrison and 2 police detectives. They walked in through the front door, and Sandra's face went white. "Robert Morrison," one detective said calmly, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and theft from a charitable organization." The backyard went silent, camera flashes frozen, champagne glasses suspended mid-sip. Robert tried to bluster. "This is outrageous. I'm on 3 corporate boards. I chair the community foundation. My lawyer will." "Your lawyer has already been contacted," the second detective interrupted. "We've executed search warrants for your financial records. We have testimony from your son, Derek Morrison, and evidence provided by your daughter-in-law, Elena Rodriguez. You have the right to remain silent." They handcuffed him, right there, in front of everyone. In front of the society photographers who'd been documenting the Morrison family's generous birthday celebration for their beloved granddaughter, Sandra lunged at me. "You bitch! You conniving little bitch! How dare you!" James stepped between us. "Mrs. Morrison, I'd strongly advise you to stop talking. You're currently facing assault charges, child endangerment charges, and potential conspiracy charges related to your husband's fraud. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Then he handed her the restraining order. Effective immediately. She was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or Lily. She had 24 hours to remove her belongings from my home. The party guests were already pulling out phones, texting, calling, spreading the news. The Morrisons were finished, not just legally, but socially. Their entire world was built on reputation, and I'd just demolished it in front of everyone who mattered in their circle. Derek knelt down next to Lily, who was hiding behind my legs. "Hey kiddo, I'm your Uncle Derek. I knew your daddy. He was my best friend when we were little." He pulled out a photo, one I'd never seen, of two young boys building a sandcastle on a beach, laughing in the sunshine. He'd want you to know you're going to be okay now. Your mom made sure of that. The next 3 months were a legal whirlwind. Robert was charged with 14 counts of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. He pled guilty to avoid trial, got sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The restitution alone bankrupted them. Their house was seized, their assets frozen. Sandra, facing her own charges for assault and filing false reports with CPS, took a plea deal. Probation, community service, mandatory anger management, and a permanent restraining order. Their lawyer, Patricia Vance, was disbarred for her role in the fraudulent custody case. Turns out she'd been helping Robert set up some of those shell companies. She's facing her own criminal charges now. Derek moved back to Seattle. He got a job at Microsoft, bought a condo near Green Lake. He sees Lily every week. He tells her stories about her daddy. He's the family she deserves. James Chen became not just my lawyer but a friend. He helped me set up a trust for Lily's college fund, something the Morrisons could never touch. He connected me with a therapist who specializes in family trauma. He checked in on us, made sure we were really okay, not just legally safe but emotionally healing. Rachel threw us a freedom party when the restraining orders were finalized. Just us, some pizza, terrible wine, and the sheer relief of being able to breathe in my own home again. I repainted the master bedroom, soft lavender, Lily's favorite color. I moved back in, put up photos of Michael, filled the space with memories that were ours, not theirs. I converted the basement into a playroom for Lily, full of light and color and joy. Lily's in therapy too. Dr. Sarah Weinstein, who specializes in early childhood trauma. We go together sometimes. Lily draws pictures of her feelings. She's learning that what she witnessed wasn't normal, wasn't her fault, isn't how families should work. She asks about her daddy a lot. I tell her the truth, that he loved her more than anything, that he was brave and kind and funny, that he made mistakes like everyone but he always tried his best. She asks about her grandparents sometimes too. I don't lie about that either. They were hurting people, I tell her. Hurt people sometimes hurt other people. But that doesn't mean we have to let them keep hurting us. We're safe now. And we're going to stay safe. I still work nights at Seattle General. I still make mistakes and burn dinner sometimes and struggle to fold fitted sheets. I still cry on Michael's birthday and our anniversary. But I don't cry in the basement anymore. I don't flinch at the sound of footsteps. I don't apologize for existing in my own home. Last week, I got a letter from Sandra, forwarded through James, who read it first to make sure it wasn't threatening. It was an apology. Sort of. Wrapped in justifications and excuses and half-hearted explanations about grief and stress and not thinking clearly. She wants to see Lily. She says she's changed. I haven't responded. Maybe I never will. Because here's what I learned through all of this. You can't negotiate with people who see you as less than human. You can't reason with people who are determined to destroy you. You can't fix people who don't think they're broken. What you can do is protect yourself. Document everything. Build a case. Find people who believe you. And when the moment is right, when you have enough evidence, when you've given them enough rope to hang themselves, you execute. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, if I regret destroying the Morrisons' lives. Here's my answer. I didn't destroy their lives. They destroyed their own lives. I just made sure everyone could see what they'd been hiding. I just made sure they faced consequences for their actions. I just made sure my daughter would never have to grow up thinking that abuse is love, that cruelty is family, that you have to accept mistreatment to belong. That's not revenge. That's justice. Lily turns 5 next month. I'm throwing her a party. Just us, Uncle Derek, Rachel and her kids, some friends from preschool. We're going to bake a cake together, chocolate with strawberry frosting, her favorite. We're going to play games in the backyard and blow bubbles and make a mess. And at some point, when she's older, when she can understand, I'll tell her this story. Not to scare her, but to teach her. I'll tell her that her daddy loved her enough to leave her protected. That her uncle loved her enough to come home and fight for her. That her mom loved her enough to endure hell and come out the other side with evidence and a plan. I'll tell her that she comes from strength. That she comes from people who stood up to bullies and won. That she never has to accept cruelty from anyone, No matter how much money they have or what their last name is or how much they try to make her feel small. I'll tell her that the day I made that phone call to James Chen, the day I decided to stop being a victim and start being a strategist, that was the day I became the mother she deserved. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor 8 months ago. The blood has long since been cleaned up. The scars on my cheek faded to thin white lines that catch the light sometimes. But I remember that moment. I remember my daughter's scream. I remember the feeling of being powerless. I'm not powerless anymore. Neither is Lily. And that's the story I'll tell her when she's old enough to hear it. Sometimes the only way to win is to let them think they're winning. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to pretend to submit while building your case. Sometimes the long game is the only game that works. Sandra and Robert Morrison thought they were taking everything from me. What they didn't realize was that every time they pushed me down, I was documenting. Every time they humiliated me, I was recording. Every time they hurt me, I was building evidence. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. They thought I was alone. They were wrong. They thought they could take my daughter, my home, and my husband's legacy. They were wrong. 6 weeks. That's all it took from the first call to James Chen to the arrest at the birthday party. 6 weeks of letting them believe they'd won, while I built the case that would end them. Was it worth it? Every second. Every slap. Every insult. Every night in that basement. Because now Lily is safe. Now she'll never have to worry about them taking her away. Now she can grow up knowing that justice exists, that bullies can be defeated, that you don't have to be wealthy or powerful to protect what matters. You just have to be patient. You just have to be strategic. You just have to be willing to play the long game. The pie is served cold in Seattle. And it's delicious.